Well, thank you for that. It's great to be here, and again, Wayne, it's been wonderful that you invited me to this this breakfast this morning. I notice the interesting food on the table. In fact, I have called 000 because most of what you're looking at here is toxic. So just in the event that some catastrophe happens this morning, we're prepared for it. What I want to talk to you today about is how to challenge everything that you know about your health. Almost everything that you know about health, diets, and all the other things that you're meant to be doing to keep healthy are absolutely dead wrong. We've had 40 years of people lying to us. And it began tragically with one simple thing that should have been amazing. In 1976, the American government convened together a large group of people to try and figure out what was causing heart disease in the United States. There was a massive epidemic of cardiovascular disease, heart attacks occurring all over the place. And two groups in industry went to war with each other. One was the cattlemen's industry, and the other was the grain industry. Now, sadly, a dreadful human being by the name of Dr. Ancel Keys, whom I hope you will look that up at some point, had already made up his mind about what caused heart disease. So it was a case of don't confuse me with the facts because my mind is already made up. And he'd concluded from rabbit experiments that were done where rabbits were fed high cholesterol food and actually got sick and had cardiovascular disease, that cholesterol must be the problem causing cardiovascular disease. Of course, rabbits don't eat cholesterol food, so it'd be no surprise whatsoever that if you feed rabbits food that they don't normally eat, they might actually have a bad reaction to that food. And in this case, they developed cardiovascular disease. Well, when the Senate hearings were held, the cattlemen were really winning the argument. There were so many physicians, scientists around the United States who said, man needs a high meat, high fat diet, and sugar is toxic. In the cover of night, while everybody was fast asleep, the Senate convened again, and they were persuaded, very much so, that the United States could make a fortune as a grain producer by exporting those grains to the rest of the world. And instantaneously, grains won. So Ancel Keys managed to change all of human history. This is amazing. We have been living a chaotic life for the last 40 years, all due to one man's crusade and greed coming into the picture. This whole dietary food pattern that we've been eating today is based entirely on politics and not the least bit on health. Now, a perfect storm happened. This is amazing. But in Japan, a Dr. Endo had looked at some stuff called red yeast rice. And red yeast rice, some of you might even be taking it, lowers cholesterol. Now, since cholesterol had been impugned as the cause of heart disease, obviously, if you had something that could lower cholesterol, you had a marketable item. And lo and behold, they took this red yeast rice, which contains 7 chemicals, that's 2 fingers on that one and 5 there, 7 chemicals, one of which they picked out and put it to use in dogs. And they lowered the cholesterol in the dogs. It was amazing. Sadly, 50% of the dogs died. So they went back to the drawing board and figured out how to actually produce this stuff in a way that would lower the cholesterol and didn't kill the dogs. This got through the FDA in the United States in record blinding speed. It turned out that the people sitting on the panel, the 13 members who were on the panel, most of them were from the drug industry that was actually producing these new class of drugs called statins. So it's no surprise that these things made the fast track. It was along with Viagra, and you can see why that would happen. So there are items that have made it through the FDA approval process in record time and other things that are held up for years and years. It might not surprise you that most of the ones that are held up for years and years look as though they're the ones that might actually cure something, whereas the things that make it through quickly are those that will generate a fortune but don't necessarily cure you. And you may think that this is sounding a little, paranoid and so forth, but the fact of the matter is, this is what is going on today, and I'm going to tell you about a drug that's in Australia at the moment that is causing major grief. So let's just develop this story. So we have a food industry that produced a massive amount of food for export to make the US a major exporter and earn income. And every other country around the world, including Australia, Canada, and Russia, produce grains at maximum capacity because they're great export earners. Now, I've got to tell you something. Wheat is toxic. That stuff sitting right there on that table is absolutely and utterly toxic. Humans were never meant to eat bread, pasta, pizza, and although most of you probably love the idea of beer, it too is nothing but liquid bread. Inside that stuff are proteins that are absolutely foreign to us. We did not evolve on bread. It is not part of our evolutionary pattern. And for those of you who are creationists, please block your ears for a moment. I don't want to offend your senses, but I'll tell the rest of you that for the 2.5 million years of human evolution, we did not see that stuff. And I have to say to you, if we need machines to take a substance, crack it, break it, thresh it, and do all sorts of things to it, it might occur to us that it's something we shouldn't eat. Worse, if we compare the grains today, thanks to Monsanto, they've been all genetically modified. And these contain proteins that are even more foreign to us. Remember when the wheat fields were marvelous? You know, the amber waves of grain, beautiful, you know, hip high and higher wheat fields. Now, what is wheat? It's about this big. It grows like that. Why? Because it's easier to harvest. And to get it there, no one cared what happened to the wheat. You know, whether it's got poisons in it or not, too bad. Most of the modern diseases, the diseases of the modern era, can be pointed right to that stuff sitting on that table. And it doesn't matter that everybody knows this in the scientific world. It doesn't matter, because that makes a lot of money. It's cheap. It costs a few cents to make a packet of cornflakes that sells for $4. On the other hand, the markup on meat is not very much. And that's how the cattlemen lost in that argument. Didn't matter that it was a better product, healthier, that lost the day. Then along came fruit. If we're talking about grains, wholesome, healthy grains, and I've got some ads from the United States of about 30 years ago, and all the time they put the word wholesome, wholesome grains. You hear wholesome, wholesome. It's to get you attached to the word grains must be wholesome. We don't have to prove they are, we just have to keep saying they are, and eventually you'll believe it. And then we've got all these wonderful organizations, and I won't name them specifically, but they have the word diabetes, they have the word heart foundation, or they have the word obesity, or they have some other nutrition, something like that. And those people latched onto this like you wouldn't believe. Why? Because you're all getting sick, and now we have a reason to live. We've got a reason to have an organization that raises money. Remember, President Nixon said the war on cancer, we'll have it cracked in 10 years. 45 years later, we are nowhere close to having it cracked because it won't be. Can you imagine what would happen if we actually cured cancer? Industries would collapse everywhere. Hospitals, their oncology units would go to hell. Drug companies would lose billions of dollars. It isn't going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Even if the substance exists, and it looks like it just might. There is a substance that's out there at the moment that has been tested. The papers have been published on it. The US government not only has banned it, but it is illegal to have it in your possession. In the United States, a physician cannot administer this stuff. It's illegal. Think about that for a minute. Just think about that for a minute. That is horrific. When we go back and look at our evolution, we see a trend over a couple of million years that is built into our DNA, and it's rock solidly built in. In Africa are a great, amazing group of people by the name of Hadza, or they are Hadzabis. They live in Tanzania, next to a lake called Lake Eyasi. It is believed that all humans, the first group of people that could be considered humans, evolved right in that spot. And it happened when we left the jungle. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Our closest cousins are bonobos and chimpanzees. They eat lots of fruit. They have big tummies. They have smaller brains. Humans, however, evolved in a very different spot. They evolved in a very dry, arid place with a massive saltwater lake. And in that lake were oysters and other fish, and we started eating them. We can see the oyster pits. where humans actually ate the oysters and discarded the oyster shells in these pits. And from that moment on, our brain grew and our stomach shrank. We have a different brain than most other animals. 20% of our brain is cholesterol. Cholesterol. Isn't this just terrible stuff that you have to get out of your system? Oh my God, your cholesterol is too high. Can you imagine that Mother Nature would take something so important that you have to have it? It's in every single cell in your body. Your cells are constructed of cholesterol. It's the reason why you have mobility. You can move, you're flexible. Plants don't have cholesterol. They break, they crack, they don't have that flexibility that we do. And it is the insulator around all of our nerves. You take away that cholesterol and you short circuit. There is a reason why people who are taking drugs to lower their cholesterol have a higher rate of Alzheimer's than the normal population. You're attacking the brain. This is dumb. Mother Nature would never have given us a substance so important that it's in our brain and made it toxic. How dumb would that be? So when you think about it, this is really amazing. Now, we were told not to eat foods that contain cholesterol. We were told not to eat saturated fat. It's really bad for you. It turns out saturated fat is not the problem at all. And in fact, the American Academy of Dietetics and Nutrition just came out with, it's Nutrition and Dietetics, just came out with new guidelines. It is basically eat as much saturated fat as you can get your hands on. Throw salt over your food. The evidence is in. Low salt foods lead to a higher death rate. We've been told just the opposite. Why? Because a drug industry's got stuff to get your salt level down, even if you don't manage to do it yourself by avoiding it in foods. So we've got a drug to lower cholesterol for a non-issue. We've created type 2 diabetes. We've got increasing rates of Alzheimer's disease, people with muscle pains on these terrible substances. So I'm just telling you, go to my website later on, have a look at it, and learn everything you can about these drugs and cholesterol. Because you'll know cholesterol has never killed a single human being. These drugs, however, have. So there's a problem, a non-existent problem with a drug to fix a non-existent problem. That has made the drug industry $650 billion. $650 billion that could have actually been spent on looking at the root cause of heart disease. Terrible. But that's what we've got. Let's go back to the Hadza. They get up in the morning and they don't have bread. They've never seen wheat. They don't grow that stuff. And they get up and have nothing to eat because you'd be crazy to sleep next to last night's leftovers when jackals, lions, and other things like that are lurking around the corner. So they discard that bones. They eat everything. They eat nose to tail. Pete Evans, for all the people who bashed him, they're all dead wrong. He's dead right. You eat nose to tail. Everything in between. Every famous chef knows the best food to cook with is offal. Liver, kidneys, brains, sweetbreads, those are the foods chefs love to use. Anybody can cook a piece of steak. So the Hadza go and hunt on an empty stomach. That's built into our DNA. We're meant to get up in the mornings and do a lot of exercise and then eat. I hope I see the day, if I live long enough, where society changes its rules for work and we don't come to work until about 10 or 11. And we can work to whatever time we need to get our job done. But we spend the early part of the morning in a fasted state exercising. And when we do, the light bulb goes off in the brain and we become amazing. We make growth hormone. Growth hormone costs $300 a week if you buy it, if you can get it. You make it, it's free. And guess what? You haven't had to spend any money on breakfast. So just think about the cost savings. You're not spending $300 a week on growth hormone and you're making lots of it yourself and you've saved yourself a breakfast. You know, that's up to a few $1,000s a year, just that alone. So think about that. The Hadza, though, go off and they get their food and they bring it home and eat it, and they don't eat very much. Their caloric intake is around about 2,200 calories a day. Most of you sitting here consume over 3,000 calories a day. Some of you will be consuming 5,000 calories a day. Most of it in the form of wholesome grains. And, oh, where did humans get fruit from? If you're on a dry lake, fruit trees, there'd be a few little berries here and there. They didn't harvest anything. They dug up roots. The roots mostly are inedible. We're watching what they're doing today. They chew this stuff and they get the juice out and they spit the pith out. They get rid of all the fibrous stuff. And they're getting their nutrients that way. But they're lean and they're spectacular human beings. And, oh, they have no diseases. None. They just get old and die. With no medical care, they make it into their 70s, no help from the pharmacy or a doctor or anybody else for that matter. They're eating and they're living out in clean air with clean water, and they're exercising and they don't eat much, and they've never seen fruit much, and they've never seen that stuff, and they are amazingly healthy. So we have created this perfect storm of a food industry that leapt onto cheap foods. You can get your fruit every day of the week in the supermarket. It's no longer seasonal. We have grown fruit to be big and sweet. The original apples were tiny. They were probably really the crab apple, and there might have been something that predated that. If you've ever seen pictures of original pineapples, they were tiny. All of our fruits were tiny, and they weren't that sweet. We've created these monstrous things today that we think are natural, but they're not. And there is no such thing as natural sugar being better than any other kind of sugar, because all sugar is sugar. And worse, every time you eat a sweet potato, a regular potato, rice, it's all turned into sugar. That's where it's coming from. And what does sugar do? Well, guess what? It makes cholesterol. Oh, really? Yes, it does. It helps make cholesterol. What about the other things that it makes? It makes triglycerides. Do any of you know what triglycerides are? Put your hands up if you actually know what they are. Okay, let me explain this. When you go and have your cholesterol tested, you're interested in your cholesterol number, a number that means absolutely nothing. Means absolutely nothing. What does matter are the two things that follow it, which you, doctor, probably won't talk about. They're called triglycerides and HDL, so-called good cholesterol. There's no such thing as good cholesterol or bad cholesterol. That's another made-up lot of rubbish. But that's marvelous because the labs love these things, so you can keep being tested over and over again. You'll go back and you keep having these tests done. The only thing that matters, actually, is the triglyceride and the HDL ratio. You want low triglycerides and high HDL. When you eat lots of saturated fat, you get high HDL and low triglycerides. When you eat lots of fruit and lots of bread and lots of starchy stuff, the opposite happens. The word triglyceride means tri, three, glyceride, sugar. 3 sugars attached to fat. Lethal. It's lethal. It's actually how fat is stored. So, how do you get fat? You eat this stuff. If you eat fat, you don't get fat. You can never get fat from eating fat. Whoops. Oh well, maybe the lecture's wet. The point is that saturated fat is healthy. Polyunsaturated fats, the ones you were told to eat, go get those, have margarine, toxic. When you look at the plaque inside arteries, what do you see? Polyunsaturated fat. That's what's in there, and it's oxidized, which means it's rusted. It's in very bad shape. You cannot rust saturated fat. It won't let oxygen in. And you can't rust olive oil either. So the best oils we can have are coconut oil and olive oil, and cook and eat all the saturated fat you can get your hands on as long as it's grass-fed. Another part of the problem is we're feeding grains to our animals. They never used to eat that stuff. And so the grains form omega-6s, and we actually want omega-3s. You get more omega-3 today off a Berkshire pig grown here in Victoria than you do from the farm-raised salmon. That is outrageous. The pigs make lots of omega-3s. Most people wouldn't even dream of that. They think that's terrible fat. It's actually really healthy for you, as it is off lamb and beef and so on. So the perfect storm that came about then was a food industry that fed you rubbish and addicted you. We know that sugar is as addictive as cocaine. It lights up the same place in the brain that cocaine does. Why would that be? Why do you think that might happen? Why would sugar do that? The likely answer, and we're only guessing, is that when fruit became available at the end of summer, the little that there was, humans were kind of driven to eat it because it would make fat. It would help them store up a little bit of fat to get through the winter into the next year. It was helpful. But today, we've taken something that's helpful and made it toxic to us because we overindulge. Our brain did not develop a barrier to saying you've had enough carbohydrate. And that's the problem. On the other hand, your brain does have a barrier to protein and fat. None of you could sit down here today and eat 500 grams of butter. You just couldn't do it. You'd be sick. Why? Because the brain said enough. You've all had the experience of just drooling at the thought of this lovely big steak landing on your plate. But once you're done with that, if somebody offered you a second one, you'd say no. Why? Because the brain knows to stop at a certain level of protein. But having had that full tummy and somebody says, we've got some nice, beautiful apple crumble here with homemade ice cream, you are sure as eggs to say, I reckon I'll make room for a little bit of that. Because the brain doesn't know how to say no to carbohydrate. It is thoroughly addictive. So we've got a couple of cons going on here. One is that that's healthy and that's healthy. The other is that cholesterol is bad and that you need to lower it. Not true. When you eat properly and you exercise properly, your cholesterol will never be an issue. It never has been for humans in all of our human history. It's only recently that it's become a problem. And we make cholesterol because it is the equivalent of the water at a fire. Cholesterol is made when you inflame yourself. And these foods are highly toxic and inflammatory. Sugar is inflammatory. It makes our body go crazy. We produce, the moment we get sugar into our bloodstream, we produce insulin immediately to get rid of it, as fast as we can get rid of it. That's what we do, because it's so toxic. There are 7 teaspoons of sugar in an apple. You would never think of putting 7 teaspoons in your tea or coffee. People would look at you and say, you're a glutton. Well, if you've eaten 2 apples and a banana a day, you've just had 15 teaspoons of sugar. And honey doesn't get off the hook either. So I want you to really think about eating paleo. And if you go to my website or you go look up low carb, high fat, you'll actually see diets that are out there. Pete Evans has got a great book on books really on paleo. There are many of them out there. Professor Tim Noakes, who's actually mentoring the Melbourne Football Club with their low carb, high fat diet at the moment. He's also mentored Australian cricket, Springboks, All Blacks. This guy's amazing. South African fellow. He's got an extremely marvelous book all about low carb, high fat. And that is one of the tools I want you to really think about, because when you get your diet correct, everything else becomes correct. You become amazing. You will not have rheumatoid arthritis, thyroid disease. You won't get Alzheimer's. The likelihood is very remote. You won't get type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, 390 million diabetics in the world today. When the numbers projected from the year 1900 would suggest we should only have 45,000. How did we go from 45,000 to 390 million? And by the end of this decade, it'll be 500 million people. 200 million in India, 200 million in China, and 100 million for the rest of the world. We're mad. We're eating ourselves to death. It's going to overburden the healthcare system. And we're bringing our kids up on this crap. And so we're setting the stage for them to die early. We are now looking at the first generation of children who will die earlier than their parents. It has never happened in human history. We have to stop this nonsense. It's just unacceptable. We can't afford it. And our little humans deserve better than to be brought into this world only to be set up to die of diseases that they don't have to get. It makes me very, very angry. And our governments don't care, and our food and drug industries don't care. Their job in the drug industry is to keep you sick but keep you alive. That way you make them a fortune. You don't cure anything. You just keep people alive. And that's the state of affairs we've got ourselves into. Sadly, our professors are busy doing the job, the dirty work of industry. They are paid people. I'm not going to name names, but just recently, an idiotic professor from the University of Sydney, at least I'll say that, published a paper that said paleo diets kill. He left off the word rodents because it was about mice. It got a lot of traction in the press, and so the press was going about paleo diets killing. He actually made the statement that we should be eating lots of grains that are indigestible. You tell people to eat food that's indigestible? What are you talking about? But you do that. So he said, yes, you get people to eat lots of grains that are indigestible, and like mice, they'll live a longer life. Well, you cannot go from mice to humans. It's never worked. So I want you to do it again. When you read stuff, headlines like this, really look at who said it and what might be the background, the people funding them to make them say such utter drivel. I see I need to end here in a moment. Can I have 5 minutes? Because the next part of it I want to tell you about is this. You cannot outrun a bad diet. All the exercise in the world will not help you lose weight unless you go to extremes to limit your caloric intake, and you have to go to unhealthy extremes. The studies are clear as a bell now. As you exercise, you will lose a little bit of weight to start with, but then the weight comes on. And that's the frustration I get, especially with women who see me, who are going frantic, gaining weight, kilos by the year, and they're going to the gym, bless their hearts, and they're getting hip and knee injuries all the time because their weight is going up and they can't understand what's happening. But they've been told to eat this and exercise. So the two things are going to collide. When you don't eat fat, your brain thinks you're running out of food and energy. You can only get energy from two sources. Glucose, that's our backup system, and fat, that should be our primary system. If you starve yourself of both, the brain goes ballistic and now will store everything it can as fat. You won't lose weight. So that's a really important thing to understand. Now, exercise is great. We need to. It's important that we do exercise, train the muscles. When you work your muscles, your bones grow stronger. You don't get osteoporosis. When you sit on your ass all day doing nothing in an office, you get osteoporosis. That's what's going to happen. Your blood sugar levels goes up and you develop type 2 diabetes. So we've got a lot of things that we need to change in life. But you can do it for yourselves. At least here's a start. If you can just do it for yourself, this is critical, and then hopefully we get the message out to the rest of the community. We've got to work with our government and industry to change what we're doing. Just one last point. Don't eat protein powders, whatever you do. They are an absolute waste of time. Worse, not only do they provoke a strain on the liver, but those protein powders get rapidly metabolized into amino acids, which cause the liver strain, but they also get metabolized into glucose. So you're getting a sugar hit every time you do a protein shake. It is not an alternative to meat. Eat meat. And if you're a vegetarian, there are ways to deal with that as well. There's a fabulous lot of stuff for vegetarians to go onto paleo. If you look low carb, high fat vegetarian, on the web there's some fabulous stuff where you can actually get almost an adequate amount of protein. The worst part in a vegetarian diet, which is not what humans need at all, is that you get too many carbs, typically. But it can be done, so don't give up on that either. And I'm not just specifically speaking to people today who are meat eaters. You can actually have a healthy vegetarian diet. However, what we're seeing in India at the moment is an explosion of type 2 diabetes because of the vegetarian diet, because people are eating too much. Indians, once upon a time, had very little food. If you've got very little food, you're not going to get fat, no matter what you do. You are what we call skinny fat. You don't have muscle, but you're not really fat either. On the other hand, now we've got this explosion of obesity and type 2 diabetes in India because of the massive intake of carbohydrate and sugar. I'm going to end that there. This could go on for ages. I'd like to direct you to my website because there's a lot of useful information there. And my blog is very funny because I'm poking fingers at all the nasty people in this world who are trying to make us sick. And I'm getting some good pushback, which is really handy. Listen, I want to thank you very much for your attention. We are going to send you a copy of my book, the name of which might not be what I hope it is. I've named it Chasing Antelopes. It might be a subtitle or something like that, but it will be out shortly, and it's really another means of you taking control of your lives. And this is the best first step, is if you can control your exercise and your diet, you will never need a drug, and you'll live to be like the Hadza. Really marvelous, healthy people into good old age with no support from industry. And that's my goal. Thank you.